It is truly an honor to get to talk to you guys. And that's not just something I say. I know every time you go to hear somebody speak, they're like, oh, it's such a great honor. I'm so honored to be here. And a lot of times it's just so, you don't throw things at them and whatnot. But I truly mean that. And I'm about to tell you why. Because the reason why it's such a great honor to talk to you guys is part of the story of how I became an author. I'm going to tell you guys the story of how I became an author because I was 33 years old when I met my first published author. 33 years old. And before that time, I had no idea what kind of people wrote books. I had no idea where books came from. Like I just kind of, I don't know, I had this vision in my head of books just sort of like descending from ivory towers carried by teams of doves. And these ivory towers are people with, tweed jackets and bow ties and Ivy League degrees. I don't know what. I didn't know what kind of people books came from. I grew up in this small farming town. And so people around me didn't write books. So my story begins. So I'm going to tell you guys how I became a writer because I want you guys to see what you need to become a published author because it will save you guys some time. You guys will have a head start on me. You guys will be 33 minus however old you guys are. I can't do math. I won't do math on a stage in front of people. I can't do math anyway. That's how far ahead of me you will be in having met your first published author. And I hope it will get you thinking in a way differently than I did. So my story begins. Are you guys seniors? Is that right? Is that what okay, cool. So my story begins when I was pretty much a senior, right about at y'all's age. And I really loved books and I loved music. I was obsessed with those two things. And I was getting to a point in my life where it wasn't enough for me anymore to kind of passively participate in those things. I wanted to actively participate in them. I was hungry to make art. I wanted to be more of an active participant in the art that I loved. But now I just told you that writing books was not something that people like me did. So I pretty quickly dismissed the idea of getting into the book writing business. So that left music. So I go out, I buy myself a guitar, take it home, I start practicing hours and hours a day, probably 6, 7, 8 hours a day. I was up in my room practicing the guitar. I would practice till my fingers bled and until my wrists ached, just hours a day. And I got good enough to where in my early 20s I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA. You want to make it as a musician, you pack up and you move to Nashville, Tennessee. And you get there and you write songs and you make connections and you perform and you put a band together and you tour and you do all those things. And that's what I did. I did all the things that you need to do to be a professional musician. So things were going great. Things were going really well. We were getting people to our shows. We were getting good press. We were happy with the recordings we were making. Everything was just going fantastic. Do that all through my 20s. And then I hit age 30. Y'all ever had one of those moments where you're just doing some random thing? You're drifting off to sleep, or you're just in the shower, or you're just in line at the grocery store, and the universe just opens its windows to you for a second and reveals some great truth to you, some great truth of how it works to you. You ever had that? So I'm drifting off to sleep one night. And I have this realization that I do not listen to none of my favorite musicians made it big in music after they were 30 years old. That's the first thing I realized. None of my favorite musicians made it big in music after they were 30 years old. Second thing I realized, I'm 30 years old and I haven't made it big in music. So that's a problem for me. And I start thinking about it. That's a problem. But you know what? I'm not a quitter. I persevere in things. So I'm not just going to pack it in. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep persevering at this because maybe I am among that 0.01% who makes it big after age 30. So I keep plugging away for a few more years. And that's when I realize, finally I take stock one day and the reality really sets in, this isn't going to happen for me. Sometimes in life, the what seems impossible really is impossible. Sometimes in life, you can't always do everything you set your mind to. Sometimes your dreams that you've had and you've held and have driven you for years and years, most of your life, sometimes those dreams are just going to die. They're just going to die. They're going to wither on the vine and fall to the ground and be trampled underfoot. Dreams are just going to die sometimes. Anyway, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you, Miss Blair. Thank you. Woo! Dead dreams. I really am gonna commit to that joke one of these days. It's gonna have to be at a high school where I'm not so wonderfully treated as I am at this one, but I am really gonna commit to that one. It's always fun to see the looks on the faces of the teachers and librarians who bring me in to talk to the school when I do that joke, because they're looking at each other like, we're going to be fired for this. All right. So where were we? Yes, dead dreams. So chapter 2. So I've got this basket filled with dead dreams and dashed hopes, and I go to the place where dreams go to die, which is law school, and I get a law degree, and I start working a grown-up job as an attorney. And actually, here's the fun fact. I still work that job even to this day. And here's the other fun fact. That job is actually why I'm in Knoxville. I'm a prosecutor for the state of Tennessee. So what that means is I prosecute murderers, rapists, child molesters. So I'm here in Knoxville actually to argue a case against a child molester. So actually I work for you guys and protect you from all the bad people. I keep all the bad people locked up. I'm kind of a murder expert. I'm going to leave some time for questions. If you guys want to ask me questions about murder, I can talk to you guys about murder. So I'm on the East team of the Violent Crimes Division of the Tennessee Attorney General, which means I get Knoxville, I get all the little hills and hollers around East Tennessee. So that's the job I start working, and I'm still working that job even to this day. At this time tomorrow, I'm going to be standing wearing a nice suit and tie in front of the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals, and I'm going to be arguing that a child molester should stay locked up. So I start working this grown-up job as an attorney, and that dream that I had is not quite dead. I told you it was dead. It wasn't quite dead. That dream had burned down from a bright flame down to this single little glowing ember. So I decided to take this little glowing ember, and I'm going to pass it off to somebody who can do with it what I could not. Maybe they can take this little glowing ember and build it back into a bright flame again. So I began volunteering at a music camp for teenagers called Tennessee Teen Rock Camp. And there's another one called Southern Girls Rock Camp. What we do in these camps, we bring in a bunch of teenagers for a week during the summer. We sit them down on a Monday morning and we say, what instrument do you want to play? And they tell us guitar, bass, drums, etc. I used to teach guitar at this camp. And so we would put them in classes. We have classes where we teach them their instrument. We'd put them in bands. They would learn how to play with a band. They'd learn how to write a song. We'd teach them how to book a tour. We'd teach them how to record themselves. All the things you need to know to be a rock musician, we would teach these teenagers to do. So for 1 week, then at the end of the week, we put them up on stage in one of Nashville's big music venues where famous people have played. People like Taylor Swift have played these venues. And then these kids will play in front of hundreds of people who are paying money to see them play. It's awesome. It's an awesome experience. Some of these kids have never touched a musical instrument before this week. And they're up there on a stage where incredible musicians have been, and they're playing in front of paying audience members. And so I would go help out at these showcases, and I'd be backstage, and I'd be tuning their guitars. I'd be fixing their, broken guitar strings and fixing, their volume knobs and stuff on their guitars. I'd be sitting back there watching my kids on stage. And I would just be so emotional watching them. And it took me a few years before I realized what it was that I loved so much about this experience. I love the way that you guys love the art that you love, the way young adults love the art that you love. How many of you guys have something, show of hands, some form of art, whether it be, I don't care, painting, music, video games, movies, graphic novels, anime, I don't care what it is, but some form of art that is so important to you, that's so intrinsically a part of who you are, that it is part of your identity, part of the way you relate to the world. How many of y'all have that? See, now that is a lot of hands. That is a lot of hands. If I ask this same question to an equivalent sized room of adults, I would get maybe like 3 hands and the rest would be like, I like vacuuming kale salad. So it's just not the same thing. Like, it's a really magical thing, the way you connect with the art that you love as a young person. So now that gets me thinking. It would be really, really awesome to make art for young adults. But now I have a problem. And if y'all have done the math on this, you probably can figure out what it is. By this point, I am well past 30. So I am well past the point when I can make it big in the music industry in general. I am way, way past the point where I can make it big in the music industry playing the sort of music that gets marketed to young adults. Y'all, I am like 2 years older than Justin Bieber's father. Okay, I'm not going to be making the kind of music that gets marketed to you guys, that gets consumed by you guys. So that is out. I'm not going to be making music for you guys. And music is all I know how to do. So if I want to reach the audience I want to reach with art, I'm going to have to reinvent my life. I'm going to have to turn my life upside down. And here I am, I'm closer to age 40 than I am age 20. The older you get, the harder it gets to turn your life upside down and to reinvent it. But that's how much I wanted to make art for you guys, that it was worthwhile to me to do that. So I start looking around. What can I do to reach young adults? You know what? Am I going to become a juggler? Do the teens love juggling? Is that the hot new rage? What am I going to do? And I noticed that there's this big category of books called young adult books. And I still love books at this point. There's this big category of books called young adult books. Now, I don't mean to brag. I'm a little bit of a genius. I think to myself, young adult books. I bet those get marketed to young adults. I bet young adults read young adult books. See, not much gets past this steel trap mind. So I decided to write a young adult book. Now, what has changed for me? Because you remember I said that writing books wasn't something that people like me did. So what has changed by this point that I am so audacious as to think that I can try my hand at writing a young adult book? Well, there's 3 things that have fallen into place that give me the audacity, that give me the courage to think that this is something I can do. The first thing, at my day job, I do a lot of writing. I do a ton of writing. It's mostly what I do. About once a month I go into court, I put on my suit and tie, and I go into court and I argue. But that's only about once a month, and the rest of the time, what I am doing is I'm sitting at a desk and I'm writing stories. Now, they're not fiction. I don't get to write fiction, but I do get to write stories. So I will get the facts of a case from the law enforcement investigation. The police will gather up the facts of the case, and they will bring it to me, and it's up to me to take the facts of this case and stitch them into a story, like I'm making a quilt out of murder, I guess. That's a terrible comparison. I got to work on that, but making a murder quilt. So I put these stories together, and I go and I tell these stories to the judges. And it's not just me who's telling a story. I got to fight the other guy's story. the murderer, the child molester, the raper, because they're telling their own story. And their own story is, I'm innocent. Their own story is, I did it, but the police violated my Fourth Amendment rights, and therefore I should walk free, or, any one of a number of things. So they're telling their own story about why they shouldn't suffer the penalties for what they've done. And I have to beat the other guy's story. So it's like I'm a competitive storyteller, right? So I'm telling a lot of stories in this line of work, and I am getting pretty good at it. You guys will be happy to know that I don't lose very often. I don't very often lose. The murderers don't end up walking around Alcoa, Tennessee very often when I'm on a case. And so I'm feeling pretty good about my storytelling ability, about my writing ability. And I think if I can tell a story that's good enough to keep a man in prison for the rest of his life, then maybe I can tell a story that's good enough to keep a young adult reading and turning pages. So that's the first thing that fell into place. Second thing that fell into place, I met my first published author. And it wasn't just anybody. I didn't just walk into a room and shake hands with a published author. This was a friend of mine. She was a librarian at a small town library, and she would tell me about this young adult manuscript that she was working on. And I would just kind of smile and nod politely, and the whole time she's telling me about this, I'm thinking to myself, oh, I'm sorry you didn't get the memo that people like us, we don't write books. It's the people in remember, the ivory towers, the teams of doves and the bow ties and the tweed jackets and all that. That's who's writing books. It's not people like us. Well, she didn't get the memo. So she finishes this manuscript. She sends it off to this big-time literary agent who also didn't get the memo, I guess, because this big-time literary agent loved her book and took it to a publisher who also didn't get the memo because this publisher loved her book and published it to hundreds of thousands of readers who I guess also didn't get the memo because this friend of mine became a New York Times best-selling author. And I watched it all happen in real time. So what that got me thinking was, y'all know how people kind of hang out with people who are like them, like smart people hang out with smart people, kind of idiots tend to hang out with idiots. That's sort of, I see you guys looking around for the groups of idiots. There are no idiots in here, you're all very smart. Smart people hang out with smart people, idiots hang out with idiots, and maybe, I thought, writers hang out with writers. Maybe that's how that works. So that's the second thing that made me think that I could do this. Maybe my friend knows that I'm a writer even before I do, and maybe that's why I'm friends with her. Here's the third thing, though, and this one is the most important. If you want to become a writer, this one is the most important because you don't need to have worked for the office of the Tennessee Attorney General to become a writer. Most writers haven't. J.K. Rowling? Nope. Stephen King? Nope. So you don't need to do that to become a writer. You don't need to have met my friend to become a writer. Y'all are meeting me. That's good enough. It's not that great, but it's good enough. Here's the third thing, though, and this is the one you need. I was no longer afraid to fail. I was no longer afraid to fail. I had failed at music, and it was fine. It was fine. I mean, it sucked. It sucks to fail, but it was mostly fine. My family still loved me. My friends still, tolerated me. I could walk down the street and people wouldn't point and laugh for that specific reason that I failed at music. And it was all fine, right? So I wasn't afraid to fail anymore. If I try to write a young adult book and I fail, I'm in no worse a position than I was before. Nobody will know. I'll just go about my life. I'll take up juggling or quilting or something else, and I'll probably fail at that too, and then I'll take up something else, and I'll probably fail at that too, and I'll keep going until I die, and if I go to heaven, then I'll probably fail up in heaven. I'll probably be a crappy harp player, and I'll just continue like that through all eternity, and it'll be fine. That's just what I'll do if I fail. But if I succeed, then I end up standing at Alcoa High School with a microphone in my hand, talking to a group of seniors about the book I wrote that they read. I mean, I didn't think about it with that level of specificity necessarily, but you all get the point. And that would be really awesome. So when I told you guys at the beginning that this is a real honor for me to be able to do this, I wasn't just blowing sunshine. I was telling you guys the truth. I turned my life upside down to be able to do this, to be able to make art for you guys, to be able to make books for you guys to read. And so to be able to stand up here with a microphone in my hand and be talking about this, it's a dream come true. It wasn't easy to do. So let me tell you how I went about doing it. So I've decided to write a young adult book. Now, novels need ideas, right? You got to have an idea for a novel. So I came up with an idea. What I did is I went back to my songwriting catalog and I came up with a couple of songs that I thought had more of a story to them than I had told in the original 3 or 4 minutes of the song. So I put those two songs together, and I can't decide which one I want to write a novel about, and I think to myself, you know what? It doesn't matter. Nobody's going to read this book. Nobody's going to care. So I'm just going to put both songs in the same book. I'm going to base the novel on both of these songs. I'm going to figure out the connections later. Doesn't matter. No one's going to read it. So I can do whatever I want. I can have fun with it. So there we've got an idea for a novel. Now, the next thing is characters. Now, a novel needs characters. And I figure that, you know, here's the thing. Novels have a lot of pages, right? They're very thick. There's a lot of writing in a novel. Not many pictures to take up room. So I have to write a lot. And I don't know how I'm going to do that because I've never written anything as long as a novel before. So I figure the way to do that is to write about people who I love and who fascinate me. Because if I do that, then they're going to carry me through the novel. You know, if you're writing about somebody who fascinates you, then you're going to want to keep pressing forward through the end to know what becomes of them, to know what happens to them, to find out what happens with their life. So I think of the 3 types of people who most fascinate me at that point in my life. And once more, I can't decide which one of those people I want to write a novel about. And once more, I think to myself, you know what? It doesn't matter. Nobody's going to read this anyway. I'm just going to take all 3 of these characters, I'm going to put them in the same novel, and they're just going to be friends. They'll figure out how to be friends with each other. So now I've got an idea for a novel. I've got characters for a novel. And this is where I realize I don't know how to write a novel. I have no idea what I'm doing. I've never had a creative writing class. Still to this day, I've never had a creative writing class. I've taught more creative writing classes than I've had. So I have no clue what I'm doing. So I think to myself, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to cheat. I'm not going to write this novel. I'm going to let somebody else write it for me. And that somebody else is going to be my characters. I'm just going to let those characters tell me about themselves. I'm going to let them tell me their stories, and I'm just going to write it down. Because here's the deal. I am not capable of coming and sitting down across from any one of y'all and saying, let me tell you your story. Let me tell you who you are, who you love, who loves you, where you've been, where you're going, what you desire, what you fear. I can't tell you any of those things about yourselves. It's just not something, it's not knowledge that I have. Here's what I can do. I can come and I can sit across from you and say, tell me who you are. Tell me about yourself. Tell me who you love. Tell me who loves you. Tell me where you've been, where you're going, what you've seen, what you desire, what you fear. All of those things that make you a person. Tell me those things about yourself. And I can write them down. And in that way, I can write a story about you. I can write your story. So I think if I can do that with real people, I'll do that with fictional people. So I invite these characters into my head. For 3 or 4 months, these characters, I'm not writing anything about them. I'm just listening. I go on these long walks at night, and I leave my phone at home because that's how I enforce boredom upon myself. Here's a quick digression. If you want to create art, if you want to write stories, if you want to create art, it's very important to enforce boredom upon yourself. Why? Why is it good to be bored? Because when you're bored, that's when your mind begins telling stories to itself, to try to keep itself occupied, to try to keep itself sharp. So all of us carry around this incredibly efficient boredom-killing device called a smartphone. And I'm not anti-smartphone, as I'm about to tell you. I'm very much not anti-smartphone. But the problem with a smartphone is it's very good at killing boredom. If you get bored for even a minute, you pull this thing out, you're streaming video, you're texting a friend, you're doing things that kill your boredom. And therefore, your mind doesn't have time to tell stories to itself. Your mind doesn't have time to be quiet and listen to itself. So you got to be bored. So I would go on these long walks at night, because that's how I enforce boredom upon myself. And I would just listen to the voices of these characters. I know. I just walked around with voices in my head for 3 or 4 months. Yeah, like a crazy person. I'd be standing in line at the grocery store and listening to my characters talk. I'd be waiting my turn to argue in court. And I would check in with my characters, and I would listen to their voices. 3 or 4 months, I did this as they told me who they were. By the end of those 3 or 4 months, I was assured that I was not trying to tell them their story, but they were telling me their story. So now, after 3 or 4 months, I'm ready. I'm ready to tell their story, because they're telling it to me. But now here's my next problem. Are y'all seeing the pattern here? Writing is nothing but solving one problem after another. So here's my next problem. I don't have time to write a novel. I'm in the murder business, and business is good. We stay pretty busy. There's a lot of murders in the state of Tennessee, I'm sorry to say. Go figure, it happens. So when am I going to write this novel? When am I going to have time to write this novel? Well, I take the bus to work in downtown Nashville. I do that because it allows me to have, time during the day that I'm not stuck behind the wheel of a car, cussing other drivers, sitting in Nashville traffic. I can let somebody else do the driving for me, and I can read or return emails or do other sorts of things. So one day, I get on the bus, and I pull out my smartphone, and I open up a Google document, and I entitle it The Serpent King, and I start typing all the way into work. My right thumb. Type, all the way into work. I get to work, I put my phone away, I pull out my autopsy photos, spread them out on my desk, and I get down to work, get down to murder business. I do that all the way until lunch, pull my phone back out, tap with my right thumb, all through lunch. Lunch gets over, I put my phone away, I work till the end of the day, get back on the bus, pull my phone back out, and start typing again. So I do that for 25 days, and I come up with the first draft of my first book called The Serpent King. This book sounds like a fantasy novel, but it's not. It's like Perks of Being a Wallflower meets The Outsiders meets John Green. It's about 3 kids growing up in a small town in rural Tennessee, about an hour and a half west of here. So it's about their struggles, them being misfits in this small town, them not fitting in, etc. So I come up with the first draft of this book called The Serpent King. So I'm going to keep this next part real short because I want to give you guys time for questions. So I give this manuscript to a friend of mine who's a real good writer, really good reader. She says, you know what, Jeff, I think my literary agent would like this. I'm going to give it to him. I say, great, please do. So she gives it to her literary agent. He gets back with me. He says, I love this book. I want to try to sell it to a publisher. I say, great. He takes it out, sells it to Random House Publishing. Biggest publishing house in the world. This book I wrote with my right thumb on my phone going to and from work with the little scraps of the day I had available to me. Sells it to Random House. So they buy this book and then they sign me in a contract for 2 books because they say, we like this book so much. I bet you have a great idea for a second book. And I'm like, I don't. So, one day I'm out for a walk, enforcing boredom upon myself. I need an idea for a book, so I better go be bored for a while. And as I'm walking down the street, these 3 big helicopters, big military helicopters, fly over my head. They're probably on their way to the military base in Clarksville, Tennessee. That happens a lot. These big helicopters fly over Nashville. And as they fly over my head, I suddenly get a flash of an idea for a story about a young man in a small southern military town who takes it upon himself to do goodbye days with the with the families of soldiers who are killed in combat. So this might be starting to sound a little bit familiar to some of you. So I take this idea to my editor and say, I think I got an idea for my second book. Now, she shot down like 8 or 9 ideas for my second book. Because you can publish a book and still be chock full of crappy ideas. And I was full of terrible ideas. So she had shot down probably 8 or 9 ideas. So I bring this idea to her. I'm like, I got it. I got the idea for my second book. And she says, okay. And I tell her about the goodbye days. She says, okay, you might have something here. This might be less crappy than your other ideas. She says, I like the idea of the goodbye days. But instead of soldiers, let's make the goodbye days be with other teenagers' families. Because you're a young adult writer, right? Let's keep the book focused on young adults. So I was like, cool. And if we do that, then we can have it so that the teenagers who are killed are friends of my main character, which means that my main character would know them, possibly in ways that their own family did not, which means that these goodbye days can take on this greater emotional resonance and meaning. And my editor said, great, there you go. That's the book. Go write it. P.S. You should make your main character be at fault for their death somehow. So I was like, okay. So that's where the texting and driving comes from. I didn't set out to write a cautionary tale about texting and driving. I just needed a way that a character could kill 3 of his best friends by accident. And there's not that many ways you can do that as a teenager. I guess you could have like a terrible, chainsaw accident, like he, playing with a chainsaw accidentally kills his 3 best friends. I don't know, like he's got a pet bear that gets loose and kills his 3 best friends. I don't know. There's not that many ways that you guys are capable of killing 3 people by accident. There's just not that many ways. Texting and driving happens to be one of them. So I get to have a plot device that works for my plot and also have a convenient cautionary tale. Every summer, there's this big spike in sales for goodbye days, and it took me a little while to figure out what was going on. I was like, what is happening? This book is selling like it did the week it came out. And then I realized, oh yeah, all these teenagers are going to driver's ed and their moms and dads are buying this book for them to make them not want to text and drive. So, all right, fine. So that's where this book, Goodbye Days, came from. If those helicopter pilots, I really need to find them and thank them someday, buy them a beer or something. Don't drink. I need to, if those 3 helicopter pilots had flown a mile to the west, there's no goodbye days. If they had flown a mile to the east, there's no goodbye days. They picked a route that took them right over my head. And that sparked the inspiration that evolved into this book. So, that's enough of me just talking at you guys. That's my story. Okay? Let me leave you with this before we have time for questions. If you want to become a writer, there are a few things you need. And there are a lot of things that you may think you need that you don't need. You don't need a fancy Ivy League degree. You don't need to have grown up in a wealthy family. You don't need to have grown up in a connected family. You need to have a point of view and a story to tell. And if you have a point of view and a story to tell, you can become an author. Now, here's a couple more things that you're going to need. You're going to need to be able to finish what you start. Because ain't nobody wants to read a book that ends mid-sentence 3/4 of the way through the story. So you got to be able to finish what you start. But that's real simple. If you're in love with a story and you're in love with characters, it's very easy to finish a story because you want to see how that story ends for them. Got to be able to finish what you start, and you've got to be able to take criticism and not let it break you. Because as a writer, you're going to get a lot of criticism, and it's going to hurt. It's going to make you want to quit. It's going to make you think you don't have what it takes to do this. But I promise you do. If you've got the story and you've got the point of view, you've got what it takes. You've just got to be able to take that criticism and let it make you stronger and not let it break you. And if you can do those things, then you guys can become a writer. So that's it. That's my story. That's me. Now I want to open it up to you guys for questions. Y'all can ask me about anything you want. You can ask about books, you can ask about music, you can ask about murder, whatever y'all want to ask about. I'm here for you guys.
What was your friend's book?
What was my friend's book? So my friend was an author named Stephanie Perkins, and the book she was working on at that time was called Anna and the French Kiss, which is like kind of a romantic comedy. And her latest book is called There's Someone Inside Your House, which is a horror novel. It's a great novel. And she is a New York Times bestselling author. She's a big author. She sells, hundreds of thousands of books. And I just watched her, just like me, just work on a manuscript and publish it. Just a normal person who could tell a story.
Is several one-page stories revolving around one character interacting with several other characters a good idea for a book?
Okay, so it'd be like a bunch of short stories of one character interacting with several other characters. I'd have to see it. Like, everything is in the execution. Like, you can do, anything that's well executed is a good idea. In general, it's harder to publish collections of stories than single novels, just for whatever reason. So if there was a way to call it a novel, like a novel in stories, then that'd be the way to go. But again, it's all in the execution. If it's well executed, absolutely. Absolutely. Other questions?
What's your band called?
What was my band called? We were called Creech Holler. We were kind of like a country southern rock band, kind of dark, heavy blues band. And we were named after, my bass player was from way up in Kingsport, Tennessee. And his family was the Creeches, and they lived in Creech Holler. And so that's where we got the name of the band. I am, yeah, actually. So I have a third book that comes out in spring of 2019. It comes out on February 26, 2019, and it's called Rain and Delilah's Midnight Matinee. And it is much more of a comedy than The Serpent King or Goodbye Days, which isn't hard to do. Goodbye Days, not the biggest comedy in the world, but Rain and Delilah's Midnight Matinee is about these two girls who have their own TV show on their local public access station in Jackson, Tennessee. And on this show, they show these cheesy horror movies like from the 50s and 60s and 70s. And they dress up like vampires and they host these movies. And during breaks in the movie, they do like goofy skits and read viewer mail and stuff. So they just had this very like silly, goofy TV show. And one of the girls wants to go into television as her career. So she's using this show to try to build experience and build a resume for her TV career. The other girl, her father abandoned her family when she was young and left behind all these horror movies. And so she's doing this show to try to reconnect with her father and hopefully make him kind of wish that he hadn't left their family. And the book is about whether they'll be able to take their show to the next level so that it can do for each one of them what they want to do in life, and they won't have to kind of go their separate ways. They can stay together as best friends. And then I'm working on a fourth book that actually takes place partly in East Tennessee, in Newport, Tennessee, and it also takes place at this elite prep school in Connecticut. It's about this girl who's a genius who makes this important scientific discovery and gets this scholarship to this prestigious Northeastern prep school. And she's from Newport, and she won't take the scholarship unless they give a scholarship to her best friend as well, who is also from Newport, Tennessee. And the story is told from the perspective of the best friend. So I'm working on that one now. I don't know when I'm going to finish it. The writing kind of goes a little slower at this point in my career, because the way it works is you gather up, as you move through life, you gather up observations and insights and things that you want to talk about and things that you love. And so on your first book, you just pour it all out. There's all this stuff you wanted to talk about and all these insights you had. So it's easy. It all comes out easy. In the second book, it gets a little harder. And by the third book, like you pretty much spent that account. It's like a checking account that you pretty much spent down. So you got to build that account back up by making observations and figuring out new things to be in love with. And so by my fourth book, like it's pretty difficult. Like I am pretty like tapped out. That account is pretty tapped out, and I got to let it build back up again to where I can write about it. So it's going slower than my first couple books, but it's coming along. Good questions, y'all.
Are you ever gonna write one about like Knoxville?
What's that?
Are you gonna ever write a story like based in Knoxville?
It's very possible. It's very possible because, I mean, the way my life is, I just don't have time to like, oh, I'm going to write a book about Antarctica, so I'm going to go spend 6 months at a research station in Antarctica. Like, I can't do that. So I'm kind of like a bird that just pulls from what's around it to build its nest. And that means that I write about the place I live, the place I am, the place I spend time. And I love Knoxville. I love to spend time in Knoxville. So yeah, I probably will write a story based in Knoxville sometime, just because I think everywhere has good stories. And there are so many good stories here in Tennessee. And there are good stories in Knoxville. So yeah, I probably will. One of my favorite authors on earth, Cormac McCarthy, grew up in Knoxville. And he wrote several books that were based in or around Knoxville. So I've always loved his books. And so, yeah, for sure. For sure. Other questions?
What are the two songs you put together for Serpent King, is that correct?
Yes. So what was the question?
The two songs that
The two songs. Okay. So for my book, The Serpent King, like I said, it was based on two of my songs that I had written. One of the songs was called The Serpent King. And it was written in kind of this like Appalachian ballad tradition about this man whose daughter is killed by a poisonous snake. And so he starts killing snakes in revenge for this act of nature. So that's what that song was about. And I quickly realized that song probably couldn't sustain a whole book, but it could sustain a plot thread, right? So the other song that I had written was called Rusty Town. And it was a story told from the perspective of a young man who is reflecting on the smallness of the town that he lives in and the smallness of the life that he leads. And basically the thrust of the song is, I want to get out of here. Like I'm tired of sitting around this rusty town. And so that I realized was a character. That was a story. That trajectory, trying to get out and trying to live this larger life than you've been born into. So those were the two songs that I kind of put together and combined. And if you read the book, The Serpent King, you see how I've found the connection between those two. And I saw another hand back here.
As you become established, have you kind of set up a daily routine for your writing?
Yeah, more or less. So my daily routine for writing kind of consists of every night when I get home from work, I get my dog. I have a little 1-year-old Havanese puppy. I get my dog and we go for a walk. And I just listen to music. I find music that puts me in the mood. It puts me in the mood to write. And I'll just go for like an hour-long walk, and I'll just lose myself in the music, and that's where inspiration starts to bubble up, and little snatches of ideas and characters will speak to me and things like that. So I will take what I gather on that nightly walk, and I'll sleep on it, and the next day I get up, get on the bus, and then I'll write on the way into work, and I'll write on the bus on the way home from work. And so I can generally do between 500 to 1,000 words a day doing that. A book is about anywhere from 50,000 to 80,000 words generally on average. Both of my books have been about 80,000 words. So if you write 500 to 1,000 words a day, you can come up with a novel in not that many months. So that's kind of my daily routine. Now, I can't honestly say that I stick to that routine every day. Like today, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to get any writing done. I don't get much good writing done in hotel rooms and stuff like that. So I'm probably not going to get any good writing done today. And I don't punish myself for missing a day of writing. I like to let my process breathe. I like to give myself time to think about things, because that's where your best work comes from. I don't put pressure on myself to, I got to get a book out every single year, et cetera, et cetera. So, other questions? Nobody wants to know about murder. That's surprising. I never have a group of teenagers go this long without asking a question about murder.
What's the worst murder case you've been in?
Ooh, there we go. Now we're off to the races. Here's the deal. I'm not going to tell you about the worst murder case I ever had, because it is so unthinkably terrible it would give you nightmares for 6 months. And I know that because it would give me nightmares for 6 months. You'll be like, oh, but I watch NCIS with my grandma and I've seen all the horrible... No. The worst stuff that happens in the world does not make it onto television. It does not make it into stories, because it's not a good story. Because the only story that comes of that is human beings are depraved creatures. So I'm not going to tell you about the worst murder case I ever had, or the second worst, because same deal, like it would give you nightmares for 6 months. I'll tell you about the third. This one's still pretty bad, but I can leave out enough details that you guys won't leave here with PTSD. So, third worst murder case I ever had. And by the way, you can see more about this case. You guys know that show, The First 48 on A&E? Y'all ever seen that? This case was on that show. I had another case that was on TV, actually. It was a case out of Blount County. This guy named Smoot, who was an insurance agent, and he was having an affair with a girl he worked with. And she broke up with him, and he actually murdered her and shot her in the road, probably not far from here. I had that case as well. I won that case just about a month ago, and that was on Dateline NBC. So if you guys want to see a case that I had that's kind of from this area, I guess maybe go online, and Dateline NBC maybe has a video archive where you can see that show. Anyway, third worst murder case I've ever had. This case is called the Leicester Street Murders. Now let me just tell you, if a murder has a name other than simply murder, it's real bad. If it has the name of a place, it's real bad. So the Leicester Street murders, you know you're in for a good time. So we begin with, we go to the city of Memphis, Tennessee. It's the worst mass murder in Memphis history, by the way. And as far as I can tell, it's one of the worst mass murders in the history of the state of Tennessee. So we go to Memphis, Tennessee, and we've got our main character named Jesse Dotson. Now, Jesse is not a great guy. Jesse was a member of the Crips gang in Memphis. And he went to prison when he was 18 for second-degree murder for 17 years. He goes to prison. So our story begins, Jesse is already a murderer. So Jesse goes to prison for 17 years. He gets out of prison. He is running around Memphis with his brother, Cecil Dotson. Now, Cecil is not a great guy either. Cecil's like high up in the organization of the Crips gang. He's kind of a bad dude too, but he has managed to stay mostly out of prison. So Jesse and Cecil are riding around one night in Memphis, and Cecil is reintroducing him to the gang because it's been 17 years, and so there's been some turnover in the gang. So Cecil is acting like older brothers do, and he's having some fun with his brother Jesse. So he's introducing his brother Jesse around, and I'm just using the language that's in the public records of the case. His brother from prison. So this is my brother from prison. Now, that's not the way to introduce somebody like Jesse Dotson, because Jesse Dotson has what we'll say is a very limited emotional toolbox for dealing with big feelings like anger. He's not good at it. He kind of knows one way of dealing with anger, which is to kill. So they get back to the house, and Jesse says to Cecil, "Hey, man, I don't like you introducing me to our friends in this manner." And Cecil says to Jesse, "What are you going to do about it?" Well, Jesse says this and shoots Cecil in the face, killing him. So Cecil is dead. Boom. So one murder. Well, Cecil's girlfriend is in the room, and she's a witness, so naturally she has to go too. So we're up to 2 now. Jesse shoots her. The friend comes in, says, "What's going on?" Jesse shoots him. The friend's girlfriend comes in, says, "What's going on?" Spoiler alert, Jesse shoots her as well. Now we're up to 4 murders. Now Jesse is out of bullets, but there's his 4 nieces and nephews that are in the house, who he also has to deal with. They range in age from 8 months to 12 years old. This is the 3rd worst murder case I've had. So Jesse gets 2x4s and kitchen knives and goes about the business of killing his nieces and nephews. He succeeds in killing 2 of them, but 2 of them survive. One was the 8-month-old. She survived. No memory of this. She's totally fine. The other who survived was the 12-year-old. And he would be about your age now. And I'll just tell you right now, I'll introduce this next part by telling you that he is physically fine now, which is going to surprise you when I tell you what happened to him. He's physically fine. Traumatized, of course, because that's a traumatizing thing to go through, but physically he's fine. So Jesse stabbed him in the head with a butcher knife. I've seen the x-ray. It's like literally an x-ray of a human head, and there's a knife in it. And he left this young man in the bathtub to die, thinking, you stab someone in the head with a butcher knife, it's a reasonable assumption they're going to die. So he leaves this kid in the bathtub and leaves the house. So it's March in Memphis, and it's cold. It's about 40 degrees, and Jesse just kind of leaves the door open on the way out. So the house gets very cold, and that, they think, saved this young man's life because it slowed down his body functions. It allowed him to kind of survive because he spent 72 hours in that bathtub with a knife in his head. So imagine that. 72 hours, 3 days. So the police finally respond to the scene. They finally get wind of what's happened. They take the kid to the hospital. They remove the knife from his head. He's in a coma. Okay? And then the police have 6 murders to deal with. So the first thing they think is, well, Jesse and Cecil were involved with the Crips, and the Crips were always at war with the Vice Lords in Nashville, or in Memphis, rather. The Vice Lords are the other big gang in Memphis. So the police go to the Vice Lords, and they round them up, and they start talking to them, and they say, did you guys do this? And the Vice Lords say, no, we didn't. Because when we commit a murder, we would go to the house, we would pull, Cecil out of the house, we'd beat him up, throw him in the trunk of a car, take him out, shoot him, tie him to an engine block, throw him in the river. You'd never find his body. That's how we would do it. And by the way, we wouldn't kill kids and girlfriends and friends. And by the way, even if we did, we would bring enough bullets to finish the job, so we didn't have to look around the house for 2x4s and kitchen knives. So yeah, this wasn't us. And the police were like, fair enough. So they take the Dotson family and they put them in protective custody. So they put the Dotson family in a safe house, put a ring of Memphis SWAT officers around the house 24/7 in case whoever did this, MS-13, the Vice Lords, the Russian mob, who knows who did this, come to try to finish the job. Meanwhile, the kid who had the butcher knife in his head wakes up in the hospital. This is not something anyone expected, least of all Jesse. He wakes up in the hospital. Not only does he wake up, he is talking. And not only is he talking, but he's making sense. He's not talking out of his head. He is lucid. And the police start to talk to them. And they say, do you remember who did this? And the kid says, I do. And the police say, would you like to tell us? And the kid says, yes, I would. It was Uncle Junior. Now, Uncle Junior is his name for Jesse Dotson. So the police are like, well, that's very interesting because we happen to have Uncle Junior in custody. We know exactly where he is. He's surrounded by a ring of Memphis SWAT officers. So they go down to the safe house. They get Jesse Dotson out of the safe house. They bring him down to the police station. They sit him in a chair and they interview him. And he's there for like 2 hours. He just confesses. He just says, yeah, I did it. It was me. Police are like, well, okay, that solves that. And then Jesse says, will you bring my mom down here? I want to talk to her too. And they're like, okay, sure. So they go and they get Jesse's mom out of the safe house and they bring her down, sit her in the room with Jesse. Jesse sits there, looks her in the eyes, and goes, it was me. I'm the one that killed your grandbabies. So there we go. Case closed. I never said it was a difficult case to solve, because it wasn't, but that is the story of the third worst murder I ever had. Now, I generally like to chase that story with the funniest crime I ever had. Do you guys want to hear that one? All right. I'm going to tell you anyway, even if you don't want to hear it, because I'm up here and I've got the microphone. So here's the funniest crime I ever had. So this lady is selling her gray Mustang convertible, and she lists it for sale on Craigslist, and the guy calls her and says, I want to buy your Mustang. So she says, cool, and they meet in a hospital parking lot. And he's kind of kicking the tires, did you change the oil, et cetera, all the things you ask when you're buying a car. And he says, I want to take it for a test drive. And she says, sure thing. She hands him the keys. He goes around the car, gets in, shuts the door, fires the car up, speeds away. She was just about to go and get in the passenger side. She's like, oh, I guess, okay. Sure hope you come back. Spoiler alert, he did not. So, she says, well, that was a bad Craigslist selling experience. I guess I'm going to eat this one. So she reports the car as stolen to police and goes about her life. Never expects to see her car again. Well, a couple days later, she gets a call from the police. They've got her car. It's in perfect condition. Now, how, pray tell, did they find her car? Well, here's the story. The police get a domestic call at this house. There's a domestic incident. So the police go to this house, and as they're walking up the front drive, they see a gray Mustang convertible in the driveway. Now, the gray Mustang convertible it's a very specific kind of car. And one of the officers says to the other, hey, didn't a gray Mustang convertible come up on the hot list just like a day or so ago? You know, the officer says, yes, I believe it did. So they run the tags on the Mustang real quick, and it comes back, it's the stolen Mustang. So they think, well, this is interesting. Okay. But there's still the domestic call that they have to investigate. So they go and they knock on the door to investigate the domestic call. Who should answer? It's our car thief. It turns out he is the one who called the police. Now, why would you call the police with a stolen Mustang in your driveway? Well, as he tells police, he got in a fight with his sister, and his sister threw an Oreo cookie at him. Now, to be fair, he said that it had happened before, an incident of Oreo throwing, and it had escalated from there. Great, fine. If it were me, I'd have gone ahead and let it escalate somewhat to see what happened. I'd have maybe let her throw an Oreo or two, maybe throw the whole sleeve of Oreos, really. I'm good at dodging. I can dodge Oreos pretty well. I would let her move on, actually, even. This is me talking. I'd let her move on to other baked goods. Loaves of bread, comically huge pies, whipped cream pies. I would let her go ahead and do that. That's fine. I'd let her throw a plate or two, honestly. This is just me. I'd let her throw a plate or two. I would finally draw the line at knives. If she got out a knife and was ready to throw a knife, that's where I would draw the line, and I would say, this has gone on long enough. I'm going to call the police. First, there's something I need to do. Because you know that Mustang that I showed up with the other day, even though I don't have a job or a source of income, well, I need to move it around the block. And I'm going to do that, then I'm going to call the police about this situation. And if you would just not, don't, snitches get stitches, don't say anything about the Mustang that I had parked in our driveway to the police, that would be really excellent. That's how I would go about it. But then I'm not, a criminal mastermind like this guy was. So that is the funniest case I've ever had. If you're thinking, well, that's not that funny, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Most crimes are not very funny. So that's the best I've got. So there we go.
How is it that you haven't delved into crime novels based on experience?
The answer is very simple, because if I were to do that, I would be dealing with nothing but crime all day, every day. And at my work, it gets to you after a while. I mean, you can only look at so many autopsy pictures of a 2-year-old that's been beaten to death by their own father before it starts to get to you. And you can get PTSD doing this kind of work. So I have to have something to clear my mind out. I have to have a beautiful place to go to at the end of the day. And that's what the writing is for me. If I weren't working this day job anymore, then I could do it. Then I could write a crime novel. But as it is, I just got to get a break, man. I got to get away from it, because you just got to be reminded that humanity is not irredeemable when you do this kind of work. Because otherwise, it'd be real easy to get caught up in it and just, lose all faith in humankind. Other questions?
Why did you decide to go to law school?
Why did I decide to go to law school? Because I have a very limited skill set. I can't do math. I can't do science. I can read, I can write, and I can speak. And those are the three things that you need to be a lawyer. And so I thought, hey, I like to live indoors and have electricity. So if I'm going to have a job where I get paid enough to have those things, I better go get a useful degree. And getting a law degree was honestly the only thing that I could think of to do with my skill set. And it's turned out to be good. It's turned out to be, I enjoy the work I do. I feel very lucky, because a lot of lawyers are very unhappy doing what they do. And I don't really recommend to many people that they go to law school. Only if you're in the position where I am, where there's like literally nothing else you're capable of doing, then do it. But otherwise, if you can do anything else, please, especially if you can do math, good Lord, do something other than law school. What's that? Oh, the one I'm doing tomorrow? It is, it's a case where a guy molested his girlfriend's daughter while they were riding ATVs. And it's kind of a weird case where he has already gone to trial and been convicted, and then he appealed his conviction and lost. And now he's in a phase called post-conviction appeal, which means that now he's saying, I was denied my constitutional right to an attorney. Because you hear on TV the police say, you have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one will be appointed for you. So you've got a constitutional right to an attorney. And the courts have said that constitutional right to an attorney means a constitutional right to an effective attorney. Like, your attorney can't just be like sleeping through your trial. So what this guy is saying is, my attorney made all these mistakes during my trial. And what I'm going to be arguing tomorrow is, no, he didn't. He did a really good job. So it's kind of a weird situation where I, as a prosecutor, am going in and I'm defending the defense attorney. I'm almost acting as like the attorney for the defense attorney, and I'm saying, no, he did a good job. Here's why he didn't do this. Here's why he didn't do that. Here's why this doesn't matter. Here's where this doesn't matter, etc., etc. So that's the case I'm going to be arguing tomorrow. Other questions? How much time do we have left? How many? 10 minutes? All right, yeah, let's get some more questions going. It is not a good. It would not be a good story for this crowd. I promise you. It would not leave any of you feeling good. None of you. Nah. You guys can't even believe how good it feels to stand in front of a group of like 100 people with a microphone and tell them no. People who want you to do something, to be just like, nah. It's a great feeling. It's so much fun. I highly recommend it. I don't know what the fourth is. I would have to think about that for a little while. Yeah, I already told you guys about the third worst murder. I told you guys about the Sean Smoot murder that happened right around here in Blount County. That one was pretty interesting. That one, you should just watch the Dateline NBC about it. It's pretty fascinating. Do they make me shave my beard when I go to court? No, they do not. In fact, there are judges on the Court of Criminal Appeals that have beards. There's this one judge who's got this great, he's one of my favorite judges on the court. His name's Judge Williams. and he's from this like small town in West Tennessee, and he always has this facial hair that's like a Civil War general kind of facial hair, like a big like mustache and goatee. He's a very styling man, and so no, I don't have to shave my beard when I go to court.
What's the most obvious case you ever solved?
Well, I don't solve the cases. That's the thing. I get the cases after they've been solved, and then I have to defend the conviction. Okay? So I'm not solving mysteries. I'm telling the story of the case in a way that gets the result I want. As far as the most obvious, I mean, the thing is, so many people confess to what they've done. Especially the worse the crime gets, the more people confess. Like, it's hard to carry around that burden, I guess. And so most of the murder cases I've seen were solved with a confession. There's very rarely an eyewitness in a murder case. I have never seen DNA. I've seen DNA solve one case in 8 years of being a prosecutor. I've seen DNA solve one case. I mean, you guys probably think like CSI, like DNA is in every case. It is almost never a factor in criminal cases. In fact, oftentimes the state will put up a witness, an expert witness, a scientist, to explain why there is no DNA evidence in this case. So DNA is rarely a factor. I've never seen a case solved with fingerprints, ever. Like, I've never seen fingerprints taken from a gun. Just never happens. Like, the conditions to get a fingerprint have to be perfect. It has to be like 75 degrees, and like you very carefully put your fingers on like the rear view mirror of a car. Like, that's when you can get fingerprints. But otherwise, like, very rare to get fingerprints. So the way that cases get solved is a little surprising sometimes. I just recently had a murder case where this guy in Nashville was killing people who he thought were snitches, who he thought were criminal informants. And the way they got him was using the way his cell phone was pinging cell towers. So they traced his movements around the city, and then they lined that up with other evidence that suggested that he was in the murder scene at that time and that he had the gun that was the murder weapon because he had texted pictures of himself with the murder weapon to friends and things like that. So a lot of cases get solved through what's called circumstantial evidence, which is that there was no eyewitness, there was no confession, just the police take a lot of different pieces of evidence and put it together to give rise to a picture. It's like if you get home and nobody's been home but the cat, and the floor is covered in like shredded up toilet paper. It's like, well, we've got circumstantial evidence of who was responsible for this. It was the cat. What kind of guitar do I play? So when I played with a band, I used to play a Gibson Les Paul and a Telecaster thin line with humbucker pickups. And then when I played solo, because I also played and recorded under my own name solo, I played a Gibson acoustic and I played a Martin acoustic. So I got probably 7 or 8 guitars at home. 2 more minutes? All right. What's the longest case I've had? It's the case that I was talking about where the guy was murdering criminal informants. And there was just a lot of evidence in that case, and it took me about 40 days to write the brief in that case. So that was about the longest one that I've ever worked on. Most of my cases take 2 or 3 days to handle. They're just very quick. Guess I got time for a couple more questions. Do I see a hand? Yes. What's that? I have. I've lost cases before. The way though that the system is set up, so I am what's called an appellate prosecutor, which means that by the time I get a case, the person has already been convicted in front of a jury. And they are fighting their conviction. And I am fighting them fighting their conviction. So the way our system is set up, it's very difficult to win once you've been convicted by a jury. A lot of times what will happen is the court will agree with the defendant that the trial court committed some error in their case, or that something wrong happened in their case. But there's this doctrine in the law called harmless error, where if the error that happened at trial didn't affect the outcome, then the person doesn't get to walk. So the idea that all these criminals get convicted and then they get to walk on technicalities or loopholes, it's like a false idea, because the system is not set up for people to win their cases on appeal. So once you lose in front of the jury, that's your best shot, because you are presumed innocent. The state has to prove you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and once you lose at that point, then all the presumptions flip, and then you're no longer presumed innocent, you're presumed guilty, and you have to overcome that presumption of guilt on appeal. So I really don't lose very often. I would say I win 98% of the time. Other questions? Did you have a question? Just brushing your hair. Cool.
What was your favorite book to write?
Ooh, what was my favorite book to write? Gosh, it's like your children, where you clearly have a favorite child. It'd be The Serpent King. That was my favorite one to write, because that one was just it just flowed out. It was 25 days, just everything fell into place. It was the book that I had been meaning to write for years and not even realizing it. And that's the book that gave me my start in publishing, and that's why I get to be here in front of you guys. Because without The Serpent King, there'd be no Goodbye Days. And Goodbye Days is why I'm getting to be here talking to you guys. So I would say it was Serpent King for sure. I have thought about it a little bit, and I probably wouldn't do it for a couple reasons. The first reason is I like to write a book and write a story and move on and just talk about new characters, new situations, and I like to leave things just a single self-contained story, because so often sequels suck. They're rarely very good. People think they want sequels, and then they see it, and it's I didn't really want that. So no for that reason. The other reason is a little bit more business focused, which is I really like to write kids who are on the cusp of adulthood. So kids who are 17, 18 years old, they're seniors in high school, they're about to graduate. Because I think that's a very interesting time in life to talk about, is that just barely on the edge of adulthood. So the way young adult books are marketed, your protagonist has to be a young adult. That is the one rule for a young adult book. They have to be a teenager. And if your protagonist is an adult, then it can no longer be marketed as a young adult book. And I'm a young adult writer. So any sequels to my books would necessarily have adult characters, because they've already graduated, they've already moved on. So basically, my sequel would have to be marketed as an adult book. And that would be there'd be the people who buy adult books would be well, what is this? Who's this writer? They'd have to explain, this is a young adult writer, this is a sequel to a young adult book, but it's being sold as an adult book. It would make no sense. So that's for that reason too, I probably don't have any sequels in mind. All right, I think that's about all we have time for. You guys, thank you so much. Y'all are awesome. If you have other questions, you can hit me up on Twitter. I'm at Jeff Zentner. I'm on Instagram at Jeff Zentner. Thank you guys.